Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to HK Cheating Stories. We appreciate each and every one of you joining us. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's get the story started. My name is Mark Carter, and for years, I believed I had the perfect life, a loving wife, two beautiful daughters, and a home filled with laughter. I worked hard, stayed faithful, and never once questioned the vows Emily and I made. But I was a fool. Because while I was busy being a devoted husband, she was busy sneaking around with another man. And the worst part? She didn't even try to hide it. She expected me to accept it. That night, when I found the messages, I realized one thing. My marriage wasn't just broken. It had been a lie all along. I used to believe that marriage was an unbreakable bond, a sacred promise of love and loyalty. Growing up, I watched my parents live out the perfect love story, always supporting each other, always devoted. It shaped the way I viewed relationships. I thought if I did everything right, if I loved my wife enough, if I provided for my family, then my marriage would be just as strong. I was wrong. I met Emily in college. She was vibrant, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and instantly draw people in. I was quieter, more reserved. We were opposites, but in a way that made us fit perfectly. She brought excitement into my life, and I gave her stability. It wasn't long before we fell in love. We got married right after graduation, full of dreams about the future. We bought a beautiful home, had two amazing daughters, Lily and Sophie, and built a life together. On the outside, we were the perfect family. People would tell us how lucky we were, how happy we looked. And for a long time, I believed it. Then, one night, my entire world shattered. It was late. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Emily was in the shower, and I was sitting in bed scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up on her screen. A text message from a name I didn't recognize. "I can't wait to see you again, babe. Last night was amazing." I stared at the message, my hands suddenly ice cold. My pulse pounded in my ears. My first instinct was to dismiss it, to tell myself there was an explanation. Maybe it was a wrong number. Maybe it was a joke. But deep down, I knew. With shaking fingers, I unlocked her phone. Something I had never done in all our years together. What I found made my stomach drop. There were dozens of messages. Texts filled with passion, desire, and betrayal. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted, had been sleeping with another man. The shower turned off. I could hear Emily humming to herself, completely unaware that the moment she stepped out of that bathroom, everything between us would change forever. I sat there, frozen, staring at the messages. A part of me wanted to confront her the second she walked out. Another part of me wanted to pretend I had never seen them, to keep living in the lie just a little longer. But I couldn't. The door creaked open, and there she was, wrapped in a towel, her wet hair clinging to her shoulders. She smiled at me, smiled, as if everything was fine. "Hey, babe," she said casually. "You okay?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and held up her phone. Who the hell is Scott? For a moment, there was nothing but silence. I watched as the color drained from her face, her smile faltering. She knew. She knew she had been caught. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. Instead, she sighed, as if she was tired of keeping up the act, and sat down on the bed. "Mark, we need to talk. Talk. Talk." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. I wanted to demand how she could do this to me, to us, to our family. But I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The betrayal hit me like a freight train, knocking the air out of my lungs. Emily looked at me, her expression calm. Too calm. "I still love you, Mark," she said softly. "I always will. But I needed something more. More." The word echoed in my mind, sharp as a blade. She needed more. As if the life we built together wasn't enough. As if I wasn't enough. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "How long?" I finally managed to choke out. "A few months," she admitted, dropping her gaze. "It's not serious. It's just something I needed." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my anger in check. "You've been lying to me for months, and you're telling me it's not serious?" She sighed again, shaking her head. "Mark, I don't want to leave you. I don't want a divorce. I just want things to stay the way they are." The sheer audacity of her words made me laugh. A hollow, bitter sound that didn't belong to me. She wanted things to stay the way they were. She wanted me to accept that my wife was sleeping with another man and just pretend it didn't matter. I stood up. unable to be near her any longer. My chest felt like it was caving in, my head spinning with everything I had just learned. Emily watched me with a sad expression, as if she was disappointed that I wasn't understanding. "Mark," she said softly, "this doesn't change anything between us." I turned to her, and for the first time in my life, I saw my wife for who she really was. "Everything has changed," I said coldly, "and you don't even realize it yet." I walked out of the bedroom, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. Behind me, Emily called after me, her voice filled with frustration, not guilt. But I didn't look back, because I already knew the woman I had loved no longer existed. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the nightstand. Every second felt like a slow, agonizing reminder of the truth. Emily was asleep beside me, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just admitted to betraying me. I wanted to scream at her, to shake her awake and force her to see what she had done to me. But what was the point? She wasn't sorry. She hadn't even apologized. By the time the first rays of sunlight crept through the blinds, I had made up my mind. I needed to know my options. I sat in the lawyer's office later that afternoon, gripping the armrests of the chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. The woman sitting across from me, attorney Claire Hudson, was flipping through papers, occasionally glancing up at me with a look of quiet understanding. "You want a divorce," she finally said, tapping her pen against the desk. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I can't stay married to a woman who's sleeping with someone else." She exhaled slowly, setting her pen down. "Mark, I'm going to be honest with you. Texas is a no-fault divorce state. That means the courts don't care that your wife is having an affair. It won't affect her rights to your house, your assets, or even custody of your children." I blinked. "What?" she sighed, leaning forward. "Unless you can prove that Emily is an unfit mother, which is nearly impossible, you'll be looking at standard custody arrangements. She'll likely get the house. You'll pay alimony, child support. You'll see your kids every other weekend, maybe one night a week if you're lucky." My stomach turned. "But she's the one who cheated." Claire's expression softened. "It doesn't matter." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had assumed that because Emily was the one who destroyed our marriage, I would have the upper hand. But no. The law didn't care about morality. It didn't care that I had been faithful, that I had spent years building this life for my family. If I filed for divorce, I would lose everything: my home, my daughters, and a significant portion of my income. Meanwhile, Emily would continue living comfortably in the house I paid for, probably inviting Scott over the moment the ink dried on the papers. I felt sick. "There has to be another way," I muttered. Claire hesitated. Then, with a knowing look, she said something that sent a chill down my spine. "You've heard the phrase cheaper to keep her, right?" I sat in stunned silence as Claire explained the cold, hard truth. If I stayed married, I could keep my house. I could be present in my daughters' lives. I could protect them from whatever influence Emily's new lifestyle might bring. But I would have to accept her affair. I would have to live under the same roof, knowing that the woman I once loved was sneaking off to be with another man. Could I do that? I clenched my jaw, picturing my daughters, Lily's bright smile, Sophie's innocent laugh. Losing them wasn't an option. Claire watched me carefully. "Mark, I know this isn't fair, but you need to think about what matters most. If keeping your family intact means looking the other way, you might have to consider it." I left the office that day feeling like a prisoner, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. That night, I sat Emily down at the kitchen table. I expected her to look guilty, maybe even ashamed. But instead, she was calm, almost relieved. "So, you saw a lawyer," she said, stirring her tea like we were discussing the weather. I nodded. "Yeah." She met my gaze, her expression unreadable, and I took a slow breath. "I'm not divorcing you." For the first time, a flicker of surprise crossed her face. "You're not?" "No. Because if I do, I lose the house. I lose the girls. And I refuse to let that happen." She set her spoon down, studying me. "Mark, I never wanted to leave you. I told you that." My stomach twisted. "Emily, do you even feel guilty?" She frowned slightly, as if the question confused her. "I didn't mean to hurt you. But I need something you can't give me." I gritted my teeth. "And that's supposed to make me feel better?" She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Fine," I said, my voice cold. "Do whatever you want. But from now on, we're just two people living in the same house. Nothing more." She exhaled, looking almost relieved. Mark, it doesn't have to be like this. But it did. Because from that moment on, my marriage was nothing more than a hollow arrangement. Over the next few days, I moved her things into the basement. She protested at first, but I didn't budge. If she wanted to be with Scott, then she didn't belong in my bed. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just shrugged and went along with it, as if this was the natural evolution of our relationship. That was the moment I realized just how little our marriage had meant to her. But what she didn't realize was that it wasn't over yet. I had sacrificed my pride to protect my daughters, but I wouldn't be humiliated. Emily thought I would accept this, that I would adjust. She had no idea that this was only the beginning, because if she was going to live like she was single, then so was I. The house felt different now. It wasn't immediate. At first, it was just small things, less laughter, forced conversations, and unshakable tension in the air. But soon, the weight of Emily's betrayal settled into every room, poisoning everything. I didn't touch her. I didn't look at her longer than I had to. At dinner, I spoke only to our daughters. I went to bed without saying goodnight. And she acted like nothing had changed. Emily didn't complain about moving into the basement. The night she found her clothes and personal things neatly packed and waiting at the bottom of the stairs, she let out a single sharp laugh. Not anger, not sadness, just amusement. "So this is how it's going to be?" she asked, arms crossed as she looked up at me. I stared at her, my heart a cold, heavy weight in my chest. "You made your choice," I said simply. She studied me for a moment, then shook her head with a smile. "Fine." And that was that. No begging, no arguing. She just picked up her bags and walked away. I should have felt relieved, but the ease with which she accepted it made me sick. I wasn't even worth fighting for. The days turned into a routine, a cold, robotic cycle of pretending we were still a family while avoiding the reality of what we had become. I still woke up early to make breakfast for Lily and Sophie. Emily still packed their lunches. We still sat at the dinner table together every night. But I never looked at her, and she never tried to touch me again. At first, I thought she was just giving me space. That maybe, deep down, she regretted what she had done. But then I saw her getting ready one evening. She walked past me in a black dress I hadn't seen in years, her perfume lingering in the air. A small, satisfied smirk played on her lips. "Going out?" I asked, my voice controlled. She glanced at me in the mirror, adjusting an earring. "Yes." "With him?" She met my gaze through the reflection, unflinching. "Yes." A sharp pain stabbed through my chest, but I refused to let her see it. "At least you're not lying about it anymore," I said bitterly. She turned to face me fully, tilting her head. "Mark, I never lied. You just didn't want to see the truth." I clenched my fists, every muscle in my body coiled with tension. "Get out." She sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable, then grabbed her purse and left. The front door clicked shut. I stood there for a long time, staring at the space where she had been, my hands shaking. I needed air. That night, I put on an old pair of running shoes and stepped outside. I hadn't run in years, but something inside me needed to escape, to outrun the anger, the humiliation, the unbearable weight in my chest. The first few blocks were torture. My legs burned, my breath came in ragged gasps. But I kept going. By the time I made it back home, drenched in sweat and exhausted, I felt lighter. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had control over something. So I kept running. Every morning at 5 a.m., before Emily could slink back home, I laced up my shoes and hit the pavement. Day after day, mile after mile, I let the pain fuel me. And with every step, I felt myself pulling further away from her. It wasn't enough. I couldn't just run forever. I needed a plan. A way to reclaim my life. One evening, as Emily sat curled up on the couch texting God knows who, I grabbed my laptop and started researching. I didn't know what I was looking for at first. Maybe a new hobby. Maybe a new place to live. But then I stumbled upon something that made my breath hitch. Camping trailers. Memories of childhood road trips with my dad flooded my mind. Sitting by a campfire, staring up at the stars, feeling truly free. That's what I needed. I turned to look at my daughters, sitting on the floor playing a board game. They deserved better than this cold, broken home. They deserved adventure. They deserved a father who wasn't weighed down by the wreckage of his past. So I made a decision. I was going to buy a trailer. And Emily? She could stay in her basement, wrapped up in her fantasy of being young and wild. because I wasn't waiting around for her to realize what she had lost. I was already gone. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It was just a structure, a place where I slept, where I ate, where I existed. I moved through it like a ghost, avoiding Emily as much as possible, barely speaking unless it involved the kids. Every night, I listened for the sound of the front door opening and closing, knowing exactly where she was going, knowing she was with him. I told myself I didn't care, but every time I heard her leave, a fresh wave of anger and humiliation crashed over me. I refused to let her see it. Instead, I ran. Every morning, before the sun had even risen, I pushed myself harder, ran farther, let the burn in my legs remind me that I was still alive, that I was still in control of something. But no matter how fast or far I ran, I couldn't outrun the fact that I was trapped, that needed to change. I started looking into travel trailers more seriously. What had started as a fleeting thought turned into an obsession. I watched videos, read articles, compared models, and scrolled through listings for used trailers late into the night. Then, one Saturday morning, I loaded Lily and Sophie into the truck and drove to an RV show outside of town. The second we stepped inside the exhibition hall, their eyes lit up. They darted from one model to the next, climbing into bunk beds, pressing buttons, exploring every little cabinet and storage space like it was the greatest adventure they had ever been on. "Dad, look at this one," Lily called, pulling me toward a grand design transcend. It had everything we needed: a bunk area for the girls, a spacious double bed for me, a small kitchen, and even a second bathroom. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw pure joy in my daughter's eyes. I had made my decision. A week later, I signed the paperwork and brought home our new escape plan. Emily barely glanced at it. "That's a lot of money to spend just to avoid me," she said, flipping through her phone, unimpressed. I smirked. "You spend money on hotel rooms?" She frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You and Scott." Her lips parted, then closed again. She didn't deny it. I let the silence linger. Then I turned and walked away. For the first time since this all started, I had something she couldn't touch. A month later, the girls and I hit the road for our first trip. We drove east toward the Carolinas, where the weather was warm and the forest stretched for miles. The moment we arrived at the campground, I could feel the tension of the last year melting away. The girls ran off to explore, their laughter echoing through the trees. I set up the trailer, cracked open a cold beer, and sat back in a folding chair, staring up at the sky. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The days were simple: hiking, fishing, making s'mores by the fire. No tension, no fights, no pretending. Just me and my girls, living in the moment. One night, as we sat by the fire, Lily looked up at me. "Dad, why didn't Mom come?" I hesitated for a moment, watching the flames dance. "She had other plans," I said carefully. Sophie frowned. "She doesn't like camping, does she?" "No, sweetheart. She doesn't." They exchanged a look, but didn't say anything else. They already understood more than I gave them credit for. Back at home, Emily barely acknowledged our trip. "Did you have fun?" she asked, scrolling through her phone as I unloaded the truck. "Yeah," I said flatly. She nodded, smirking. "That's nice." That was it. No jealousy, no curiosity, nothing. She didn't care. And for the first time, I didn't either. I wasn't doing this to make her jealous. I wasn't doing this to get back at her. I was doing this for me, and I wasn't stopping. The moment I started pulling away, something shifted in Emily. At first, she didn't care. Or at least, she acted like she didn't. She continued her late nights, her careful avoidance of me, her whispered phone calls when she thought I wasn't listening. But then, something changed. Maybe it was the way I stopped reacting. Maybe it was the way I left with the girls on weekends without so much as a word. Maybe it was the way I started looking different. I had lost weight from running. I was sleeping better. My shoulders didn't carry the weight of constant humiliation anymore. I wasn't the broken man she had expected me to be. And she noticed. It started with small things. One evening, she made my favorite dinner: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and peas. I hadn't eaten it in years, not since before she started her affair. As I sat at the table with Lily and Sophie, Emily placed a plate in front of me with a careful smile. "I thought you might like this," she said, her voice softer than usual. I stared at the plate, then up at her. She was trying, but it wasn't real. I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't remorse. This wasn't guilt. This was desperation. She was feeling me slip away, and she didn't like it. I took a bite, nodded, and kept eating. I didn't thank her. I didn't acknowledge her attempt to play the role of a loving wife. And I sure as hell didn't fall for it. A few weeks later, I met Olivia. It wasn't planned. I wasn't looking for anyone. But sometimes, life has a way of putting the right person in your path when you least expect it. I had been going to a cycling club on weekends, something I picked up after running started feeling too easy. Olivia was there from the start, tall, dark-haired, blue-eyed, confident in a way that wasn't forced. The first time we spoke, it was casual. Just two people who happened to be in the same place at the same time. The second time, it was longer. The third time, I noticed the way she laughed, the way she listened, the way she looked at me like I was someone. Not just a husband being cheated on, not just a man trapped in a failing marriage. Someone real. By the fourth time, I asked her out. She smirked, hands on her hips. Are you asking me as a married man, or as someone ready to move on? The question hit like a bullet. But I already knew the answer. As someone who's moving on, I said. And for the first time in a long time, it felt true. Emily knew something was different. She could feel it. She started hovering around me more, watching me with cautious curiosity. She noticed the way I left the house more often, the way I stopped checking in, the way I seemed lighter. One night, after the kids were in bed, she lingered by the living room doorway. You've been going out a lot lately, she said casually. I didn't look up from my laptop. Yeah. She hesitated. With who? I shrugged. Friends. The lie came easily, not because I was hiding anything, but because she had no right to the truth. She crossed her arms, shifting uncomfortably. You're not seeing someone, are you? I finally looked at her. Would it matter? Her lips parted slightly. She wasn't expecting that. You're still my husband, she said after a long pause. I laughed. A low, bitter sound. Am I? She didn't answer. And that told me everything I needed to know. By the time Olivia and I went on our first official date, I was already done with Emily. I didn't want her back. I didn't care about her excuses. I didn't feel the need to make her jealous. I just wanted to be with someone who saw me. Someone who didn't look at me like an obligation. Olivia and I clicked effortlessly. She had a daughter, Matilda, who was close in age to my girls, and they bonded quickly. We took the kids camping, went on hikes, explored places Emily never wanted to go. It was easy. It was fun. And most importantly, it was real. Emily's jealousy came slowly, creeping in like a shadow she couldn't control. She didn't ask outright, but I could see it in the way she watched me. The way her eyes flicked to my phone when it buzzed. The way she stayed home more, lingering in rooms she used to avoid. Then, one night, she broke. I was getting ready for bed when she appeared in the doorway, wearing a silk nightgown I hadn't seen in years. She stepped closer, her fingers playing with the hem of her robe. Mark, I miss you. I stared at her, expression blank. You miss me, I repeated, voice flat. She swallowed. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I love you. I should have felt something. Anger, pity, maybe even satisfaction. But all I felt was nothing. I took a slow breath and shook my head. You don't get to miss me now. Her face twisted in frustration. Mark, it was never serious with Scott. You know that. I never wanted to leave you. But you wanted me to stay while you had him. I cut in. She blinked. I stepped past her, leaving her standing there, waiting for something that would never come. Because I wasn't hers to miss anymore. I had already moved on. The night Emily tried to seduce me was the final confirmation I needed. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't regretful. She wasn't looking to fix our marriage. She was just desperate to keep her safety net in place. But I wasn't going to be her backup plan anymore. The next morning, while she was still asleep in her basement bedroom, I made the call to my lawyer. It's time, I said, gripping the phone tightly. Claire didn't sound surprised. You're ready to file? More than ready, I said. There was no hesitation, no doubt, no second guessing. Emily had spent years disrespecting me, humiliating me, and expecting me to just accept it. That was over. Filing for divorce was easier than I expected. Emotionally, it was a mess. But legally, Texas had a 60-day waiting period, and as long as Emily didn't fight me too hard, we could settle without a long, expensive battle. Of course, that was assuming she didn't go into full panic mode. I made sure I had everything in place before she even knew what was coming. I had documented her affair. I had financial records proving I contributed more to the household. I had a strong case for primary custody of Lily and Sophie, with proof that I was the one consistently taking care of them while Emily was otherwise occupied. Once the paperwork was finalized, I paid extra to have her served at home. She deserved to feel what it was like to be blindsided. I was in the kitchen making dinner when the doorbell rang. Emily, barefoot in leggings and an oversized sweater, lazily walked over to answer it. I didn't turn around at first. I just kept stirring the pasta sauce, waiting for it to happen. Then I heard it. The stiff, professional voice of the process server. "Good evening. Are you Emily Carter?" A pause. Then, "Yes?" There was a rustling of papers. "You've been served." Silence. A long, stretching silence that was so thick, I could feel it in my chest. Then the door shut, and I finally turned. Emily stood frozen, a large brown envelope in her hands, staring at it like it might explode. For the first time in years, she looked genuinely caught off guard. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and leaned against the counter. "Well, aren't you going to open it?" Her head snapped up, eyes locking onto mine. "You," her voice cracked. I lifted a brow. "What? You thought I was just going to sit here forever while you played house with Scott?" She swallowed, fingers tightening around the envelope. "Mark, you don't have to do this." I laughed. A real, amused laugh. "Oh, I do have to do this, Emily. You made sure of that." She shook her head, stepping closer. "Mark, come on. We don't have to end things like this." "We can." "Can what?" I cut her off, my voice sharp. "Keep pretending? Keep living in this joke of a marriage while you sneak around behind my back?" "No, Emily. You lost that option." Her face crumpled for a split second before she caught herself, replacing it with forced composure. "You're making a mistake," she said, voice quieter now. I exhaled, shaking my head. The only mistake I made was waiting this long. She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped herself. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed toward the stairs, gripping the envelope so tightly her knuckles turned white. The moment she was gone, I let out a long breath. For the first time in years, I felt light. She spent the next few days avoiding me. I gave her space, knowing she needed time to process the reality she had been ignoring for so long. But then, on the fourth night, she finally cracked. I was in my office, answering emails, when she appeared in the doorway. Her hair was messy, her eyes red like she had been crying. "Mark, please," she whispered. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "What do you want, Emily?" She stepped inside hesitantly, wringing her hands together. "I don't want a divorce. Can't we just figure something out?" I stared at her, genuinely baffled. "You had your chance to figure something out," I said. "You chose Scott. You chose your so-called freedom. And now you want to negotiate." Her lower lip trembled. "I never wanted to leave you, Mark. I love you." My jaw clenched. "Then why the hell did you treat me like I didn't matter?" She had no answer. She just stood there, eyes begging. But for what? I didn't know. "Emily," I said, voice quieter now, "you don't love me. You love having me. And that's not the same thing." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I don't want to lose my family," she whispered. "You already did." That was the moment she realized there was no fixing this. No undoing it. She nodded slowly, wiped her face, and left without another word. And just like that, the battle was over before it even began. The days after Emily's failed attempt at reconciliation passed in a strange, tense silence. She didn't argue anymore. She didn't beg. She just existed. The house, which had once been a battlefield of whispered fights and icy tension, now felt like an empty waiting room. Both of us just sitting, waiting for the inevitable. She knew it was over, but that didn't mean she was ready to face the consequences. It wasn't long before I got the call. Claire, my attorney, had been expecting it. Her lawyer reached out, she told me. "They want to negotiate terms before we go to court." I smirked. Of course they do. Emily had finally realized she had no leverage. She had spent years believing she was untouchable, that I would always be there, always waiting. Now, she was scrambling to hold on to whatever she could. I wasn't going to let her. We set a date for the meeting. I knew what she was going to try. She would say she deserved the house, the kids, the life she had taken for granted. She would try to convince me to settle for the scraps, to make things easy for her. But I wasn't playing fair anymore. Emily had spent years making me feel powerless. Now it was her turn. The day of the meeting, I walked into my lawyer's office feeling lighter than I had in years. Emily was already there, sitting stiffly beside her lawyer, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a tight bun. When she saw me, her lips parted slightly, but she quickly looked away. Claire and I took our seats, and the negotiations began. It was exactly what I expected. Emily's lawyer argued that she should keep the house, that custody should be split equally, that I should continue financially supporting her. I stayed quiet at first, letting them talk, watching Emily shift uncomfortably in her chair. Then, when it was my turn to speak, I leaned forward. "I'm keeping the house," I said flatly. Her lawyer started to protest, but I held up a hand. "I have documentation proving that I've been the primary caregiver for our daughters while Emily was preoccupied," I continued, deliberately avoiding the word cheating. Emily's jaw tightened. "I also have financial records showing that I paid for the majority of household expenses. Given that I've already moved my money to a separate account, and Emily has no savings of her own, I doubt she can afford the mortgage on her own." Her lawyer stiffened. "Are you suggesting my client?" "I'm suggesting," I interrupted smoothly, "that this house belongs to me and our daughters. Emily can find a new place to live." Emily finally snapped. "That's not fair," she burst out. "This is our home." I turned to her, my gaze unwavering. "It was our home," I corrected. "Then you turned it into something else." She stared at me, breathing heavily, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew she had lost. Her lawyer cleared her throat. "And custody?" "Primary custody stays with me," I said firmly. "Emily can have visitation, but I want it in writing that she doesn't bring her boyfriend around our daughters." Emily's face turned red. "Mark," I shot her a look. "That's non-negotiable." Silence stretched between us. Then, finally, her lawyer nodded. "Fine," she said, scribbling notes. "We'll need to discuss financial settlements." I cut her off. "Emily will receive her fair share of our assets, minus the house." Emily scoffed, crossing her arms. "So that's it. You get everything, and I get nothing." I exhaled, shaking my head. "You get what's fair, not what's convenient." She clenched her jaw, but she didn't argue, because she knew this was the best deal she was going to get. By the time we walked out of that office, it was done. Emily didn't look at me as she climbed into her car. I watched as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her expression a mix of frustration and something else, something that almost looked like regret. Almost. Then she pulled out of the parking lot and drove away. I stood there for a moment, inhaling the cool air, feeling the weight of years of betrayal finally lift off my shoulders. For so long, I had been trapped. Trapped in a marriage that was nothing more than an illusion. Trapped in a life that felt like a slow, suffocating death. But not anymore. I was free. And Emily? She was finally facing the consequences she had spent so long ignoring. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The divorce was final. Just like that, it was over. Years of marriage, a home we built together, the family we once were, signed away with a few signatures on a stack of legal papers. Emily was officially no longer my wife. I thought I'd feel relief. And I did. But it wasn't just relief. It was something bigger. It was freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of her betrayal, of pretending to be okay, of trying to make something work that had died long ago. I wasn't being humiliated in my own home, watching my so-called wife slip out the door to be with another man. She was no longer my responsibility. She was no longer my problem. Emily had 60 days to move out of the house. She wasted most of them pretending she didn't have to. She didn't pack. She didn't look for a place. She just lingered, as if ignoring reality would make it go away. One evening, as I came home from work, I found her standing in the living room, staring at the half-packed boxes I had started filling for her. She turned as I walked in, her arms crossed. "You're really kicking me out," she said, her voice hollow. I set my keys on the counter. "That's what happens when you get divorced, Emily." She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "I thought, maybe you'd change your mind." I let out a humorless laugh. "You thought wrong." Her eyes flashed with something between anger and desperation. "Where am I supposed to go, Mark?" I shrugged. "Why don't you ask Scott?" Her face twisted. She hated that answer. "He won't take me in," she muttered, looking away. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "That sounds like a you problem." She swallowed, biting her lip. "Can't I just stay here a little longer?" "No," I said firmly. She flinched at how fast I shut her down. "You don't live here anymore," I continued. "You stopped living here the moment you chose him over this family." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel anything. Not anymore. She left the room without another word. The day she finally moved out, I didn't help. I didn't offer to carry her boxes. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't even watch as she loaded up the car. I just let her go. And when the door shut behind her for the last time, I exhaled. The house finally felt clean. Life moved on. The girls adjusted faster than I expected. Maybe because they had already accepted the truth long before I did. Maybe because, deep down, they knew Emily had never really been there for them. Olivia and I grew closer. Her daughter, Matilda, fit in with Lily and Sophie effortlessly. What started as casual dating became something more, something real. We spent weekends camping, taking road trips, making memories. It wasn't a replacement for what I lost. It was a new beginning. And for the first time in years, I felt happy. Then, one afternoon, I saw her. I was at the park with Olivia and the girls, watching them eat ice cream and laugh about something silly. It was a warm, sunny day, and I felt light. Then, across the walkway, standing alone near a bench, was Emily. She looked different. Thinner. Tired. Like someone who had lost something they didn't know they needed until it was too late. She was staring at us. I could see the regret in her eyes, the realization hitting her in a way she had never expected. This should have been her family. This should have been her life. But she threw it away. She thought she could have both, her affair, her marriage, her perfect setup where I stayed loyal while she had her fun. She thought I would always be there. She was wrong. And now, she was on the outside looking in, watching as someone else took the place she had abandoned. I held Olivia's hand, watching as Emily turned and walked away, her head down, her shoulders slumped. I didn't feel sorry for her, not even a little, because in the end, she had no one to blame but herself. Looking back, I see now that life has a way of teaching us the lessons we refuse to learn the easy way. One of the biggest lessons? Never take loyalty for granted. I gave Emily everything. My love, my trust, my years. And she threw it away, believing I would always be there no matter how she treated me. But love isn't an endless resource. Once it's broken beyond repair, there's no getting it back. Another hard truth? People don't regret hurting you. They regret losing you. Emily never felt guilty when she was sneaking off to be with Scott. She only regretted it when she saw me moving on, living a life she was no longer a part of. Some people only realize the value of what they had when it's gone forever. For those who have lived long enough to see the patterns of life repeat, my advice is this. Respect yourself enough to walk away from what no longer serves you. You are never too old to start fresh, to reclaim your dignity, to find happiness after betrayal. I thought my life was over when my marriage ended. But the truth? It was just beginning.